Gather round, children, and let me tell you a story about the olden days of GameMaker. Back in the days when the engine was lacking virtually all of the modern features that we're used to having in the game engine nowadays, except for the fact that you could, in the engine, at runtime, apply certain effects to sounds as they were playing on the fly. And a lot of them actually weren't very good, if I recall. Like, they sounded okay in a pinch, and sometimes they were better than nothing. And these were removed from the engine entirely when GameMaker Studio 1 came around, because they were based on a, if I recall, old and rather out-of-date version of DirectX. And that was it for audio effects in GameMaker for almost 10 years. Fast forward to the November of 2022 update to GameMaker, and we have been given, reintroduced into the engine, has been the ability to play various audio effects on sounds in the engine at runtime in real time. It's actually rather nice. The list of effects that you can apply at runtime isn't extensive, at least not right now, but they should. I believe the plan is at least that Yo-Yo Games will be adding more effects later on. So, all the audiophiles out there, rejoice. November 2022 update to GameMaker is probably going to be one of your favorites in a long time, and probably will be one of your favorites for a long time into the future. So, the new audio effects system in GameMaker is actually fairly extensive, and I'm not going to get to all of it in this video, but I will cover the basic uses of it. And this is going to start with a system called audio buses. And buses in computers are just sort of a general term for like moving data from one place to another and maybe doing something to it along the way. If you've never heard of the term before, just think of like USB, the Universal Serial Bus, the PCI Express bus for plugging in components into a motherboard and that kind of thing. It's just a general term in computing for moving around data. So how this relates to audio is that all audio that you play in a game is going to go through a bus. Whether that's the background music or sound effects or any other audio that you try to play in a game. Audio buses, you can do various things. You can apply effects to them is the main thing. You can toggle the effects on or off. You can use them to set the volume for all audio that goes through a particular bus. And they're quite handy. So GameMaker has a default one. Audio bus main, as it's called. The main audio bus is just sort of the default audio bus, and you can use it as a starting point for basic effects. And you can, of course, create your own later. I guess I should probably run this demo project first so that you can see where we are. This is the demo program that we had in the last video, so my basic sound and audio video that I made. If I were to hit the Enter key, I hope you're able to hear background music. I actually can't because my headphones fell out of the headphone jack. Now I hear music. And there's sound effects when you walk around, when you talk to the NPCs, when you do all that stuff. I'm gonna turn that down because that is a little bit loud in my ears. But it should be okay in the video. So let's talk about the main audio bus. And you can create other audio buses with the audio bus create function. I am not gonna do this right now. This gets quite a bit more involved with audio emitters and listeners and some other things, and right now I just want to talk about how the basic effects work. Let's see. I'm going to instead of doing all this weird stuff with basically starting, stopping, and pausing the background music, I'm going to just have that play in the create event of the player and not worry about that right now. So audio bus main. This is going to be a struct. And it's going to have a few built-in properties that you can apply to it. The first one is going to be bypass. This simply is going to be basically an enabled switch for any of the effects that are on the audio bus. All audio buses are going to have this. All audio buses are going to have a bypass value, and if you enable this, then their effects will be ignored. You can use this to quickly toggle on or off various audio effects. Whether you want to actually have the player experience something like that in the game, or you just want to do that for debugging purposes to make it easier to hear things. There is, of course, the actual gain. And you can use this to set the volume of all sounds that play on an audio bus. This is sort of like audio, I believe it is set master gain. Audio set master gain. And this is the function that we would have used until like a week ago in GameMaker if you wanted to set the global volume of all the sounds in your game. You can still do that, or you can use the audio bus main.gain value. And if I were to actually set this to something like, let's make it a sine wave. So If we wanted to set that to something like 0.5 plus 0.5 times the sine of the time. This is going to have the volume of all the sounds in the game oscillating from 0 to 1. You can hear it fading out. Same goes for the background music. Same goes for the various sound effects in the game. And that is the audio bus main's gain value. Is that included, by the way? I don't actually know the answer to this. Bus main dot, will the gain setting also be ignored if you enable the bypass? It sounds like it will be. I don't hear it oscillating anymore. Okay. Good to know, just curious. And next, there is audio bus main. The audio buses have an effects array. And this is going to be an array of particular structs. By default, this is going to be an array of 8 elements, all of which are undefined. But this is where you can apply various audio effects to a bus. Again, an audio bus's effects is going to be in an array, and you can have up to 8 audio effects on a bus at a time. So that is going to be indices 0 through 7. I am probably not going to fill up all 8 of those audio effects at once in this demo, but if you really want to layer it on, feel free. And the audio effects, we can say audio effect create. Audio effects can be created with this function here. And this function is just going to take one parameter to start with, and that is going to be the type. And there's a couple different audio effects that you can create. Again, the plan, I believe, is for more to come later. We can say audio effect type. Audio... Is that spelled right? I'm not getting... Oh, okay, it is, it's just not being syntax highlighted for whatever reason. Anyway, audio effects type is a built-in enum in GameMaker, and it's got 6 members. So there's Bitcrusher, there's delay, there's gain, there's a high-pass filter, a low-pass filter, and reverb. And let's see, gain is basically yet another way that you can set the volume of an effect. I'm not entirely sure why there are so many ways to do that now, but hooray if you want to, I guess. Delay is basically an echo, as I understand it. Reverb is reverb, everybody knows that. High pass is a filter that is going to allow higher frequencies to be heard, but it will mute lower frequencies. Low pass is the opposite. It will allow lower frequencies to be heard, but it will mute higher frequency. Low pass is used a lot if you want to do things like a bass boost. And Bitcrusher is, I want to say this is for compressing a sound, but compression in audio is something a little bit different from compression in the general sense. Bitcrusher will basically downsample an audio effect, and I am not enough of a qualified audio expert to say if this actually sounds good. I'm sure the audio people in the comments will have some opinions about Bitcrusher, about whether or not it sounds good. But it's an effect that's there. I feel like, which one do I feel like messing around with first? Let's go with delay. Let's play with an, oh god, let's play with an echo effect for the time being. And also, let me actually set these effects in, instead of the step event in the create event. And do I really want the gain to be on a sine wave? Not really. That's probably going to make it harder to hear. Let's not do that. So all of these audio effects have some properties. This will also return a struct the same way that the audio bus main function returns a struct. And apparently we're not going to get Feather to give us syntax help here, possibly because the contents of all the audio effect structs are different based on the audio effects type that you give it. All audio effects that you create will have at least 2 properties in common. One is going to be the type, and that is just going to be a reference back to the audio effect type.delay or the audio effect type.gain or high pass filter or whatever you happen to create. And this is just a way to figure out which effect is which after it's been created. We also have bypass, and again, like the audio bus main.bypass value, this will enable or disable a particular effect. So if I were to set that to, I believe, false is what I want that to be. We also have, and these are going to be specific to the bypass effect, time, and this is going to be the amount of time between like the duration of the echo effect. And this is going to be in seconds, so if I want, for example, an echo with a delay of, let's say, 1 second, we could set this to 1. Again, I complained about this in the last video. A lot of GameMaker's audio functions will use either milliseconds or seconds, and there's not a lot of consistency to it, and it kind of annoys me. But the audio effects, the delay effect time value is at least in seconds. We have the feedback value, and that is going to be the amount of the original sound that is echoed, so basically the volume of the echoes. If you want every second an echo repetition to be played back at half the original volume, you can set that to 0.5. This is going to be a value between 0 and 1, as you can imagine. And lastly, we have mix, and this is going to be, you can think of the mix as the alpha value of a sound. So if you set this to 1.0, then you'll hear 100% of the delayed sound. If you set this to 0.0, or if you just set this to 0 rather, you'll hear entirely the original sound. And if you set this to 0.5, you will hear part of the original sound with some echo.
Hey.
Alright, that's really weird. Let's see, is there a way that I can make this less weird? If I set this to 0, I won't hear any echo at all, right? Because it'll be entirely the original sound. Yeah, and if I set this to 1, I'll just hear the original sound basically delayed by a second. It's a little bit weirder than I thought it would be. Let's set that to 0.5, the mix to 0.5, and the feedback to 1/4 to dampen the echo a little bit. Alright. That's delay. Reverb is another fun one. For whatever reason, and this sort of implies that there are other versions of some of these effects in the works, or that will be in the works, or something like that, but this is called Reverb 1. I don't know if they're working on other implementations of Reverb for audio effects, but nevertheless, we can start messing around with some of the properties of the Reverb effect as well. So we have the same type, the bypass values of this audio effect struct. We have the size, and this will allow you to set the basically the room size, so how much... Oh, don't make me say the word reverberate. Alright, here it is on screen. I'm not saying that out loud. Anyway, if you think about the difference between me shouting at my computer in a relatively small room versus something like me shouting in a giant, massive cathedral, setting the size to a larger value will increase the tail of the this effect. It will draw it out for longer, and I know that some audio tools like Audacity and fancy DAWs and stuff let you punch in like a size of the room in meters or whatever when it comes to the room size, but GameMaker is just going to have us enter a value between 0 and 1, and 0 is going to be a tiny room with very little and very short reverb effect, and a value of 1 is going to be a large room with a long, drawn-out one. I'm going to set that to 1.0 because it's probably going to be sounding a little bit more dramatic that way. And let's move on to some other properties. So there's the damping. And this is also going to be a value between 0 and 1. This is how much of the sound does that. In hindsight, I probably should have picked another audio effect to demo in this video. You can think about the difference between shouting into a room that's like full of, say, soft objects like soft furniture, or if you've ever like shouted in a closet or something like that, or in the fitting room of a department store. Don't ever do that. Versus, again, shouting in a large, echoey cathedral with a lot of hard surfaces that do a lot, that reflect sound a lot better than soft surfaces which tend to absorb sounds. Setting this to a high value will mean that there's a lot more damping happening, and the higher frequencies that tend to do that will be absorbed more quickly, and setting it to a low value will cause them to last a lot longer. So I'm going to set this to something like 0.25. And lastly, there is, again, the mix value. And much like in the delay effect, this is going to be basically how much of the original sound effect is going to be heard. And because I'm believe in compromise, I guess, let's set that to 0.5 again for 50%. Alright. Very nice. I think that actually sounded rather cool with that reverb. I can't even say the short version of the word now. That sounded rather cool with the grass footsteps, although I couldn't hear too much of those because it was being overpowered by the accordion music. So, if I increase this to, like, 0.75, and I'll leave the rest of them alone for now, and I will play the... Okay, that really is being drawn out. This room sound is probably rather huge for this sort of thing. It does make the sound effect sound a lot fuller like this, doesn't it? Okay. So that's the reverb sound effect. You can think of some fun uses for this when it comes to things like the footstep sound effects of the player, for example, walking around in a cave versus walking around in a grassy field like this versus walking around inside a house or a building or something like that. I know I'm going to have a lot of fun with these when it comes to giving different sorts of atmospheres to different sorts of environments and games. Alright, so that's that one. I will do one more. I'm not going to go through all the audio effects in this video. I'm not going to just like make this an encyclopedia entry that just turns into me reading the manual by the end. Let's do one more. I've played with probably the remaining ones. Bitcrusher is the one that I played around with the least. So let me use this as an excuse to hear what this sounds like and how I can distort the background music with the Bitcrusher effect. So, again, this is intended to distort an audio effect by basically downsampling it. By default, pretty much all sound in games for the last like 15 years has been 16-bit at 44 kilohertz. And if you wanted to, for example, emulate older hardware, whether that's 8-bit hardware or other computing devices with older sound cards, you might consider using the Bitcrusher effect to emulate that. So we have the usual type and bypass settings that we can use. There is the drive. The manual has this listed as the input gain. I am not enough of an audio nerd to be able to tell you why you would ever want this to be different from just like the master gain on the main audio bus or whatever. Maybe if by downsampling a sound you allow it to be perceived as louder or quieter, then maybe you would want to be able to mess with the drive separately, but again, I am not an audio engineer. There's the factor, and this is going to be a value between 0 and 100. This is going to affect how much the original sample is downsampled. So if you set this to a high value, we are going to be downsampling this pretty heavily. I feel like since I haven't messed with this before, I should only like mess with one of these parameters at a time before I do any like dramatic changes, so that I can actually hear what things do. The resolution, for example, is going to be a number between 1 and 16. It's going to be this is basically the bit depth of the sound that we're downsampling. 16 is going to be the default bit depth of sound. In GameMaker, if you want to downsample this to, for example, 8-bit sound, you can try setting that to 8, and I don't know if that's going to actually like sound good or just like garbage. And again, we have the mix value. In this case, let's set that to 1. Let's set that to 100% the new signal, so that hopefully I will not be confused by the by what I'm hearing. So this is not going to sound like a perfect 8-bit piece of music or anything, but okay. Really, all that did is it really just introduced a lot of distortion into the sound, which is probably not really great unless you're trying to like make something. Oh, good gravy! That sounds terrible. Don't ever do that. Unless you're trying to make it sound like a sound is playing like over an old radio or over a telephone or something like that. Let's set that back to 16, the resolution, and that should give us the original. Alright, no distortion, good. And the factor, if I reduce this, if I set this to like 50%, how is that going to sound? Okay, that sounds terrible, but that sounds terrible in a more... I now understand why you'd want to set the drive to be something lower than the regular master gain. Hey. That sounds terrible, but it's a more, I think, productive sort of terrible than what we had by setting the resolution to 4. Alright. If you did want to make it sound like some... I am going to have to make that a lot quieter in video editing, because that's going to give you a headache if you listen to it for too long. But if you did want to make it sound like an audio, like music or something is playing through a telephone or through a phonograph or something like that, then you might consider using a Bitcrusher like this. And I think I'm going to leave it there, because I don't want to listen to that anymore. Okay, that was fun. So, the audio effects that I did not talk about that are currently in GameMaker are the high-pass filter, the low-pass filter, and just the regular boring old gain function. And I would encourage you to play around with them further yourself. If you want to look at the manual page in the GameMaker manual, it's got a fairly extensive description of what all of the properties are for all of the available audio effects. And this is something that if you wanted to spend like a day just doing nothing but messing around with, it's probably worth it. I'm going to stop now. There are more videos that I would like to make on audio in the future, but I hope this was enough to give you an understanding of how basic audio effects work. My name is Michael. I like Wizards and Dragons and making games. I try to post about 2 game dev videos a week, 1 tutorial and 1 let's make a game. I need to get out of the habit of saying that because the making a game has been completed, and I will not be spinning up another one for probably a few more weeks. Anyway, if you want to see more things related to how GameMaker works, I like to talk about the weirder things you can do in GameMaker, feel free to subscribe. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute to the channel, feel free to look for the link to that in all the usual places. I make it sound like I'm telling you to go look for like pirated material or something when I say it like that. I should probably rethink that line. Anyway, I hope you all found this useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Army Armbuster, DJ Gibbles, Edward Holt, GameMaker, Harold Guidry, Jonathan Bernardez, Kiexi, Sindra Larson, Squarecrow, The Oz, and Zenjamin for supporting these videos. If you want to support the channel, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.